The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, Lord. At that time, in his teaching, Jesus said to the crowds, "Beware of the scribes who like to go about in long robes and to have situations in the marketplaces and the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the multitude putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, her whole living." The Gospel of the Lord. Clearly, that summarizes the homily of today. The widow, who stands as the image of the Christ. The widow in the story we have just listened to from the Gospel of Mark is an image of Christ. How, you may ask? Yesterday, I was speaking to a friend of mine, and I said to her, she's a widow herself, and I thought, let me pick her brains on what it means to be a widow. She started with a story. She said she heard that there was, in a particular church, the pastor had asked that all widows should stand up. And this woman stood up, and her husband was just by her side. And he looked up and said to her, "Did you hear what they said? They said, widows, stand up. Are you a widow?" She turned to him and said, "It is better if you are dead." And I thought how silly that could be. But clearly, from that story, I came to the conclusion there are widows and there are widows. The first are the ones Jesus recognized as himself. But there are other widows who probably their husbands are still here. However, their lives makes no difference. The widow that Mark spoke about today is Jesus' double. How many of us here have found ourselves somewhere, or someone has ever told us, this man or this woman looks like me or look like you? If you have, I have. My experience is not as good as yours, maybe. The man that I saw that they said looked like me, I said, no, I don't want to look like this guy. He is ugly, not ugly. He is ugly. One, he has no manners. And they said, Dom, that's how you are. Yeah, that's what my friends told me. But in the story we heard today about the widow, is a classical one that often we use when we want to raise funds. We say you give your widow's mite. If you think about it, what that is appealing to is that you should give your all. You should give your all. Keep nothing for yourself. That summarizes this image that Christ found in this woman about himself, because he gave his all. In the first reading, we encounter a widow who provided for the prophet Elijah. We heard that the mudu of rice or the mudu of gari was not spent. The bottle of oil was not spent because she gave, hoping that that would be the end. In the second reading, the letter to the Hebrews, we hear a summary as a follow-up to last Sunday's about the priesthood of Christ. The author of that letter is telling us today that in times past, the priests do make sacrifices for the people. Their sacrifices are continuous. But Jesus came and gave the final sacrifice. The author drew attention to the fact that the priesthood of old will have to go into the altar every year, especially during the feasts of Yom Kippur, where, for instance, the priest will have to make entry 3 times. First of all, he makes a sacrifice of incense. Next, he goes in, makes a sacrifice with the bull, the blood of the bull, for the sin of the priest. Then, the third entry will be the sacrifice with goat for the sin of every other person. The author of that letter is saying that Jesus has come to wipe that out just with one action. When he got hung on the cross, that put to an end this repeated effort of the priest to go in and out with bloods of animals. Jesus stopped that with his own blood. Finality. Then we come to the gospel, that classic story. We all know about this woman. Looking at that picture before you, you probably think, where is Jesus seated? I have a feeling Jesus is seated here. There are so many images like this about what really happened. But the point is this woman here, Jesus saw as his own image. Let us look at our own community. Who is a widow? Often, a widow is that woman who lost her husband. She is in perpetual mourning situation. She is perpetually mourning because at no point will her situation change except she remarries. She goes through life events with wide range of consequences. She's often severely affected financially, psychologically, sexually, and socially. She often suffers long-term health consequences. In our various communities, we can recognize this image of who a widow is. In Abuja, the widow may be different. She may not be like the woman wailing in that particular picture. The Abuja widow is likely to dress differently. Her financial situation is likely to be different. The health challenges she's likely to face are likely to be different. But the classic widow that we know is that woman who looks pitiable. Often she looks like a beggar. She looks to be someone at the margin of the society. Often as if everyone has rejected her for no fault of hers. Customs and traditions even make things worse for her. I have heard, I'm not too sure what culture encourages that in an event where a woman loses her husband, they bait the husband before funeral. The woman is forced to drink the water that was used to bait the husband. It is those issues that Jesus was out to challenge today. In a male-dominated society like ours, no man will be asked or subjected to the experience of a widow. A widower will never be asked to dress in black. It's only widows whom we force to dress like people who remain mourners. These are the experiences not only of the Jewish culture or the Mediterranean culture, but here in our midst. She is not just being denied some of those basic necessities, even her legal and human rights are denied her. I find it a bit difficult to understand even why widows themselves don't want to make effort to challenge those status quo. That you lose your husband. Yes, in times past, they tell us to dress in black. Now, why can't you believe in the faith you profess? That with faith, with the community prayers, your husband is likely to enter heaven. Why not dress in white? Change that status quo. But no, because our customs, our traditions have said, dress in black. She herself will refuse to dress in. She must wear black earrings, even if she had to change any other thing. So, her legal rights are not just denied, she even denies herself those basic necessities. It's changing. Praise God. That is what Christ has come to redeem. And that is the image that this woman stands for today. Now, the widow that we heard about in Mark's gospel, in Hebrew, it carries the meaning of one who is silent, who is unable to speak. In the first image we saw the woman carrying a baby. Her head was bowed low. The situation is not just emotional, but even psychological. She is forced to behave the way she behaves. Not because she chooses sometimes, but because, like I said, the society insists she must live by that. In Jesus' own time, a woman who is widowed, if her elder son was unmarried, she was even more disadvantaged. But if her elder son is married, she has some social benefits to enjoy from the society. In an event, she had no son at all. They may force her to return to her family. That was the kind of people Jesus had to deal with. Now, of course, many of them were all over the whole place. Wars, unhealthy and unhygienic living made men die faster than women. So we had many widows in Jesus' time. That accounts for in the Acts of the Apostles, for instance, where we had where a social structure was built to address the needs of the widows. If you look at Paul's letter, Timothy's letter, chapter 1, verse 5, 3 to 16, especially verse 14, there was an attempt to put social structures to address the needs of widows. The picture you have there is the iconic Abuja widow you are likely to find. This is not the widow that Mark was referring to in his story we just listened to. Because the widow he was talking about is likely to be the one who probably she has a son who is married, or the one who had just a little child yet to marry. But in any event, the point of including that story is to show what she is, how she behaved, and what she gave. From the story we heard in the gospel, the widow does nothing for a show because she is nobody. She goes through life lifeless. She goes through this society, pitiable. This widow learned in a hard way, because from her experience of how she is treated with disrespect. She is nobody. She is to be seen but not heard. She learns to be generous. What was denied her, she learns to give. Her kind of generosity is only possible after giving all she saves in life. Her kind of generosity comes from the small acts of fidelity which she had lived through her life. Her acts of generosity comes from the constant obedience and self-renunciation. Every time that she had to give, from the story we heard, is natural. Nobody is forcing her. From the story we heard from Mark's mouth, we had a situation that the woman gave everything. We heard they were copper coins. When you combine the two of them, they become how much? 1 penny. Now, take note of that. Mark insisted in leaving that part of it to show that she held back nothing. Mark left that part of the story to tell us that this is a constant practice of our life. Mark left that part of the story to link her with the person of Jesus' totality in giving. Now you may ask, from the way Mark presented that story, how did Jesus know that what that woman put in that offertory box is 2 copper coins that made up a penny? How did he know? First of all, let us look at the background. In the next few minutes, we are likely to have an offertory box here. We are going to sing and we come forward, right? In the first picture we saw like Jesus sat on a step and was watching. They, in Jesus' own time, they don't use offertory boxes. They use some forms of collection that is designed like a trumpet, like a funnel. Now, when you throw in your money, it makes a clanking sound. So Jesus sat, like we saw, watching. Now, the rich men will come around and throw as many as they wanted. But this woman came and threw only. So it's not likely to make the kind of sound that will attract everybody. Take note of that. Jesus is not just drawing our attention to the 2 penny, but he wants us to take note of something. He observes every little detail. Why will he sit and pick out this woman when there are other rich people who are throwing in more? Now, what she has done was once and for all. Jesus was very observant to take out these details, to the point that he didn't stop at that. He asked that his disciples should listen. This story that Mark told was meant particularly for his disciples for a purpose. Now that Jesus in the next few days is likely to be away, we heard that this event occurred on a Tuesday, and by Friday, Jesus was killed. Chances are, Jesus, being all-knowing, knows exactly what is going to happen to this woman, because all she had is what she gave. Having observed that, he drew his disciples' attention to the fact that, listen, what she has done is once and for all. What I will do will be once and for all. Now, this ties neatly to the second reading, where the priests were going in and out of the altar. But Jesus went in once, and he said, the author of the letter said, the altar is man-made. But the altar that Jesus went in once and for all is not man-made, and that the effort of this woman is not man-made, because it is the image of himself. Now, what this woman gave, she gave at a personal cost, because all she had was the 2 copper coins. Having given it, we heard she walked out. Take note of that beautiful story. The more you read this particular story of the widow's mite, it becomes like an onion. You peel one, you find something else. You peel, you just keep finding. We heard that after dropping her coin, what did she do? We never heard anything about her. Chances are she died. She had nothing more to live on. And that is the point Jesus is saying, that what she did was at a personal cost. For the rich, there was nothing to give, because there's something from where they took the last one. There's something left. So out of her poverty, she gave all she had to live on. Again, how does Jesus know this? The rich are clearly going to make more and more noises as they throw in copper coins into that, and that continues the game. But Jesus is saying to his disciples, saying to you and me today, what can we learn from the image of this widow? Every Sunday we are here. Every Sunday we make our little bits in contribution. What is it do we give? I have always said, no one is too old to give something to God. No one is too tired to do something for God. No one is too weak to sing for God. What do you give that is totality? Do we give in half measure? The image of Christ is that of totality, is that of emptying, is that of not holding back. The gift this woman gave is noiseless. For the rich, who will have to repeat it over and over, makes all of us applaud the rich. How much do we give that we don't need to be applauded? How often do we have to give to those around us that we don't wait to be acclaimed as being generous? This woman gave, nobody applauded her. For the rich who were there, the priests, the scribes were certainly praising them. The society will encourage such people. But for the widow, no one cares. Next, Jesus took the fight not just to his disciples, he took it to the temple. The temple itself let the woman down. Jesus took the fight to the scribes, to the priests, and Jesus is taking the fight to you and I. How does he do that? The temple has become a symbol of failure. The priests we had, or the scribes we had, were pompous. They let this woman down. The temple she so trusted let her down. Could someone not have said to the widow, hey, madam, hold on. Those 2 copper coins you have, you need them to survive for the next day. Nobody said that, because it is compulsory for her to make her contribution. And therefore, she had to suffer this fate she suffered. What did Jesus notice about this woman? He noticed her courage. The society had weakened her, told her she's nobody. The society has told her, you don't belong. But she stood in the midst of the rich, in the midst of the mighty. She walked with her head. Though bowed, she walked forward to give something. Jesus noticed her courage. Let me have a recap. I told you that from the image we saw, Jesus appeared to be sitting on a step. One of the things he did was how he observed every little detail. It is those details he is now praising. He noticed her courage. That when everybody was well dressed, when everyone had something to show, this woman that had nothing to show, he saw her courage and he praised her. That explains why Mark left this story and the details we have. Next, he noticed the dignity that the little she had, the little she came with, had value in God's eyes. It is not so much how much she was able to throw into those funnels or into those treasuries that mattered, but what came from her heart. That dignity is what Christ is saying to you and I, we must have, no matter how little we are going to offer in any situation we find ourselves. The widow's action in the temple that day was not just dignifying, was equally prophetic. What she did, she shamed all the rich. She walked dignified as a woman in the midst of all these rich people to do what she did. Prophetic to mean it gave Jesus the voice to say to us what we are saying. It gave Jesus the voice to remind each of us of the prophet Elisha, that this woman's action can change the social structures of her time if only people listen. Next, he noticed her kinship. What do I mean by kinship? Clearly, when I started this mass, I said this woman is an image, is an icon of the Christ, the Messiah, of Jesus himself. So Jesus saw a link between her. What she has given, the totality of her giving away, is the same thing he does, or he will do for us. So Jesus saw a link between her and himself. It is that link that sums up the power in the widow. That the widow is not just nobody without a face, nobody without a voice, but is the image of Christ. Her action also changed simple mathematics. Her giving 2 copper coins changed it to mean she gave all. 2 is more than hundreds. We now saw for the first time that a widow has changed human history, human values, human customs, human classification of whether you are rich or not. Jesus himself changed all that. We saw that from this widow, all that has changed. If you are a widow, Jesus is saying to you, don't walk with your head bowed down. You are like me. I know what you're going through. I know all the society has put on your neck. I know all the expectation of the priests, of the temple worship. I know all that. The arrogance of the priest that Jesus condemns here today comes from the fact that they failed the widow. They failed this poor woman who needed some help. Next, he noticed the disciples too. Jesus did not just see the woman who went to put in the copper coin. He probably turned around and saw that his disciples were looking towards the rich and probably applauding them and clapping for the rich. And that explains why Jesus turned to his disciple to tell them this story. Because he knows that they themselves, they belong to that same system. Since he was going to hand over the baton of leadership to them, it was time these same disciples learned from him what he is teaching. He noticed that they applauded the rich from their hearts. He equally noticed that if he doesn't stop them now, they are likely to continue the whole system that put down the widow, that put down those who need help. So he took the fight to them to say, hey, my disciples, take note of what is happening. Don't just look towards the rich. The rich are not helping matter. Now, why will Jesus attack his own disciples? He did that, like I said, to prepare them for the work ahead. Next, Let us talk about what are the sins of the scribes and the temple itself, and the sins of the church and our various institutions. In that same gospel we have read, Mark 12:20, he says, beware of the scribes. Jesus tells his followers, they devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearances say long prayers. For the sake of what? They say what? Long prayers. First of all, what Jesus was attacking there is greed. This woman has been taught over and over what is called sacrificial giving. Sacrificial giving. So her appearance in the temple on that day was to fulfill that commandment to give sacrificially. To give sacrificially to mean nothing should be left. So now, the idea of doing sacrificial giving is to build a kitchen, to build enough storeroom so that those who don't have can have access. Those who have no retirement benefits can have access. Sacrificial giving built into the system was to ensure an insurance policy for those who may be disadvantaged. But what happens is what Jesus condemns. The priests, the scribes who knew the law, appropriated what was supposed to be for the needy, for the widow. You know, to be a scribe, it will take you over 40 years of studying the law. For 40 years of your life, you bury your head in the Old Testament, knowing every line of the law and interpreting it contextually. Now, for anyone who has gone through that, society will always praise him or her. For anyone who distinguishes himself academically, the society will always put on a platform. The scribes were put in such a place, such that men and women consulted them for every little bits and pieces. And in the process, they took advantage of them. This is the sin Jesus condemned in the scribe. That first of all, they were greedy men. They were selfish. They stole from the poor. They took away those little bits that was meant for those who need it. Now, because they were well lettered, they know so much about the law, they became pompous. Most of us priests are pompous, it's true, because we think we know it all. The pomposity that Jesus even outlined here is even more manifest among the Jews. If I, a scribe, know more than you, Bishop Barrow, no matter how, let me use Mr. Amo, because we could be contemporaries. Now, if Mr. Amo and I are both scribes, and I know the law more than Mr. Amo or Professor Ingwilo, if we meet in the public, unmindful that he's older than me, because I know the law more than me, him, Prof. and Mr. Ayemo will come and greet me first. Yes. It is that pomposity that Jesus is condemning in this part of the widow's story. He's saying that these scribes, it has gone into their heads. And there's a need for the disciples to know this now before they become his disciples, before they begin to speak for him. Pomposity has no place in the life of a Christian. Pomposity has no place in our community. Pomposity is supposed to have been consigned to history. Jesus is aware of it, and he wants to warn his disciples, warn all of us, that no matter how blessed you are, no matter how preachy you are, no matter how placed you are, don't allow that to go into your head. It went into the heads of the scribes. It did them no good. Because these widows had to do this sacrificial offering, it left so much for the scribes to play around with. It left so much for them to appropriate for themselves. And Jesus says to them, beware, you my disciples that are coming to follow me behind, know that I may give you some gifts. It may not be for you, it's for the community. How lucky are we have these pretty ladies and men here. They have been endowed with special gifts. They can sing. They've come together every week. They go somewhere, practice to come and enrich our liturgy. They are not keeping it to themselves. They are not being pompous. Christ is saying to you, is there anyone sitting here in the crowd who can sing, but he thinks these ladies are not doing well, and therefore she cannot join them? Is there a man who feels he's too big, too old, too enlightened, too educated, too blessed to sing? If you are not different from the pompous. You are not different from appropriating what is meant for the community. Next. Christ denounces the abuse of the temple. Christ frowns at the abuse of the scriptural interpretation, which the scribes were known to do. Today, anybody can take the Bible. This morning, while we're driving in for the Mass, we put on the radio, we're together with the house help in the car, and we heard this gentleman preaching, and he was talking about marriage. And he wanted to draw his audience attention to the fact that marriage is God's commandment, that it is not a creation of man. And he said, God gave man dominion over everything. And he said, God gave the dominion to man so that if you have no chicken, you must eat chicken. And two of us started laughing. How? Do I have to steal my neighbor's chicken? But that God gave us dominion over all that he has created. You must eat chicken, he said. He said, you have no reason not to have accommodation. You must live somewhere. He went on and on. We had a good laugh. But here is the point. Here is the point. What Jesus is condemning is those who hold on to this commonwealth. This commonweal that's supposed to be for all of us. Next, part of the sins of the scribes is that they overdress. They dress too much to kill. Why are you laughing? Well, you can dress and still give glory to God. Those things that God has given to us are meant to help us, but they are not meant for us to use it to bring down other people. And that's the point Jesus is making with the story of the overdressed scribe. The pomposity is not just carried on from their learning, but even the outward look. And Christ is warning each and every one of us to take note of these little bits and pieces in the widow's story. The church in ages suffer from the same scandal of external pomp. We are lucky in this country. We are lucky in this part of the world where we are still growing. In many parts of the world where the church is established for over 500 years. Of course, we know what has happened. The churches are all going down because the pomposity of the church has led many people out of the door. Our church should be a welcoming church. The laws of the church should have human face. When people go through trying times, the church as an institution should stand and be there for them, not to throw the books at them. That has emptied most churches in Europe and America. And Jesus is aware of that, and he's warning his disciples. This woman that walked away, she never went back to that temple. What happened to her? She died. That woman died because of the scribe's pomposity. The church is one that we are falling into the danger of prestige, titles, privileges. I am so pleased. We are going to have our harvest sometime in December. What happens in some of our Catholic churches? I said to Father George the other day, I went for Mass, I couldn't recognize Harvest and Bazaar anymore. It used to be people come with farm produce, their handiwork, something personal to them. But I found a tree where they hung apples, foreign to our country, and they were making people stand up to buy and pay. Is that just a means of raising money? How will that lift our hearts in prayers? Jesus is saying to us, beware of this. It's not long ago we are beginning to give titles in the church. They give titles to those who probably don't deserve it. We scandalize the poor people in the church. Christ is warning his disciple that the institution itself faces the danger of slipping away from the people. Jesus condemned the sin of injustice, stealing from people who ask for our time, our availability. Often, there is this question of, it is Father who is supposed to do this. No. I've heard Father talk to you about your role from your baptismal stand. It's not just the role of the priests to bring about changes in the church. It behoves each and every one of us to make every effort to bring about change, to make the church that we want, the church that will be available to people, church that is welcoming, church that is not condemning, church that is full of mercy. We cannot impress God by our outward shows. The woman who came to drop in those copper coins was not there for show. She went giving her sacrificial offering. Whatever we bring here, every time we come for Mass, every time we attend any liturgical function, Christ is drawing our attention that the story of the widow should always come handy. What are we taking in there? Are we going to leave behind so much to go back enriched, or we are going to go away empty-handed? Questions. Now, I have a question which I've broken into three. Why will Jesus applaud a woman making a suicidal trip? From what we heard, he praised her dignity. He praised her generosity. He praised her for the kingship. My question is, Jesus is aware. The same week, on Tuesday that this story happened, Friday he was going to die. That this woman walked out of the temple empty-handed. We heard all she was going to live on, she gave. Why would Jesus praise her? It's suicidal. You are doing self-harm, self-abuse. Yes, Dr. Jekele wants to make an attempt.
Glory to Jesus.
Honor to Mary.
I think Jesus was looking at her total dependence and faith in God. She depended on God as her provider, as her sustenance, and everything. So God, who gave the little I have, I'm giving it back to you. And that whatever happens, it is your will for me. Just like Jesus gave everything that we may live, that, he will save us from condemnation. So she too gave everything, knowing that God's will be done anyhow. In her
Total
time.
dependency. Thank you. Any other person? Why would Jesus applaud this woman? Yes. Mr. Moloju.
Father, I think you have summed it up. Jesus applauded the woman because she saw in the woman his own self.
Perfect.
And the sacrifice he too was going to make in a few days.
That is it. He saw in her his own image. He applauded her because here is a woman who is giving totality. Not that any of you is wrong, but I wanted that point that he saw in her his own image. I emphasize the kingship. The kingship. There is a redemptive act that took place when this woman gave her all. And Jesus is saying, if you do that, if I do that, there is a redemptive act. Very, very important.
Glory to Jesus.
Or not to Mary. Remember the question, why would Jesus applaud this woman?
To start with, a widow is supposed to be receiving. And in this instance, the widow is giving. So for me, the giver is above the receiver.
Praise the Lord. The giver is far above the what? The receiver. Thank you very much. That funnel, that treasury, that offertory box, what has this woman done? She has grown above it. She has grown above the scribes. She has grown above the temple, because from her mega resources, from the nothing she had, she has changed human history. Value systems have changed. She's a prophet in her own right. What we are discussing today, she gave it to us because of her act. How many of us can leave behind an act that will be prophetic? How many of us can act that our stories become a life-changing experience for others? That is what the widow stands for. That is the image that Jesus wants each of us to take away. Sorry, I'm not taking more on that. Can we go to the next question? What about the money? Is Jesus sustaining the corrupt practices of the temple? The practice is this. You must give sacrificial giving. Give until it hurts. If it doesn't hurt you, you have not started. So, now, but you see, when they give, it doesn't go to the people. It made the whole temple a corrupt environment. It spoiled all the priests. And my question is, for Jesus to praise this woman, is he not saying, okay, just get worse and worse? Why did he allow this story to be kept in the scriptures? Why did he allow this act to continue? Are you not still doing offertory? Are you not still called to do sacrificial giving? Okay, let's start with him.
Father, we have the knife.
You and who?
All of us in our houses, we have the knife. We can use the knife to do productive things, and we can use the knife to kill. I'm coming to the money now. The money that is given is meant for assisting the poor, assisting the temple itself, because it requires funds to keep it in good shape for people to be coming to worship the Lord. That the scribes and the Pharisees spent this money on things that they ought not to does not make the money bad, does not make the giving of the money bad, but so that it is how we use whatever we have that makes the difference between it being a productive and good thing or being a bad thing.
Thank you.
That's why I brought the knife also.
Okay, I take it. The rich, to be rich is not bad. To have money is not condemnable by Jesus. But what you do with it is what is to be condemned. In summary, indeed, Jesus is justifying continuous support of the temple, like he said, but he said is the way, the manner, our attitude, and our approach to what we have is the issue. Yes, Franca.
Father, I think it's in giving that we receive. And if the practice of giving, we want so much from God, so we must practice to give.
You bribe God to get more.
No.
Okay.
Even in self-giving, they said if you give God your all, he gives back what you need. And I think it's connotative of giving in order to receive.
I'm a bit confused because it comes as if you are saying bribe God to get more.
It's our life is not just about taking in. Like she said, the one who gives
more than the
is
receiver.
greater than the one who receives.
Yes.
And we must practice a life of giving, of giving our all, even if not just the giving in the money part of it. It's like I said, it's connotative
Okay.
of the fact that we must give in order to receive.
Yeah. The justification here is more about sustaining the goods that God has given to the earth. Jesus justifying that we should continue to give is saying that redistribution of wealth is not a Marxist ideology. To give to those who need is sustainable. To keep it to yourself is condemnable. I accept that. Yes, who else wants to attempt that question? Yes, someone in the middle there.
Thank you, Father.
Okay.
I think it's like the tax we pay to the government. The tax is paid for the government to take care of the needs of the people. And so, like when he was asked whether it is, whether he supported paying of tax, and he said, whose picture is in the coin that you are using to pay the tax? When it was said that it was Caesar, he said, give what belongs to Caesar. What the money is used is to take care of the people. It doesn't matter that they are not using it for that same purpose, but the use of the money is for the people.
Okay.
So it's not supporting the corrupt system.
Thank you. Yeah, we all got the answers right. Nobody's wrong. Next, is Jesus justifying an indefensible institution that ignores the poor? If we all agree that it's good in giving, let's give back. How? The church you and I belong to, again and again we're accused of ignoring the poor, of shying away from our responsibilities. In times past, the Catholic Church built schools, built hospitals, hospices, constructed roads, gave scholarships, encouraged the poor, the young, the old to be engaged in one thing or the other. Jesus is saying, is he justifying that this system should continue to run?
So, why I said no, Father? Because if you read Exodus 22:22, God says, if you afflict the widow, and if they cry
Exodus
to me,
what?
22:22. So he said, if you afflict the widow and they cry to me, I will answer them. Which implies God is very mindful of widows and their suffering and their predicament. And even in Luke chapter 4:18, the first people Jesus made mention of, the Spirit of God is upon me, for He's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. Talking about poor. So why I'm looking at this is that the woman who gave is, you cannot give without loving, and you cannot love without giving. So she's showing her love for the work of God, what is happening in there. So I don't think Jesus is ignoring the you see what is happening to the poor, or to the humanity act to the widow or to the poor, but rather she's using it to teach us that in doing this you are equally showing or reciprocating with God, okay, or becoming a co-creator or whatever with the God. Father, understand me that way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In giving, we are co-creators, he's trying to say. Co-creator. In giving, we are sustaining all that God has created, and he expects us to enjoy them. Here's a punchline. Jesus noticed the widow. He notices all actors in the story. Not one. He noticed the widow, noticed his disciples, noticed the scribes, he noticed the treasury. He notices everything that happens around us. Very important. That is one thing Mark wants us to take away from this story. Next, he sees what everyone else is too busy, too big, too churchy, or too self-absorbed to see. What Jesus saw in that woman, the scribes did not see it. The rich who were there did not see it. Christ is saying, this is how I take notice of each and every one of you. This is how I take notice of all those things happening around you. There is nothing that happens that eludes my attention. For me, my take home is the redemptive part of this story. That Jesus' eyes are ever on the small, the insignificant, and the hidden. For me, the widow is a prophet and an icon of Jesus Christ himself. She said she is a living image of the Savior. He emptied his life to make life abundant at our disposals. He gives all so that we may have all. At the risk of uncertainty, the widow gives all that she has for God. God gives and gives. He gave and gives first. There is nothing each of us has that comes from us. They all come from. There is nothing you can give God. I don't know who said it. Is it St. Teresa of Calcutta who said, if you give God an egg, he will give you an elephant. If you give God an egg, he will give you an elephant in return. My brothers, my sisters, what will be a take home? Is this widow an image of Christ? Is this widow a call that each of us to do our best in our places of work, in our places of endeavors, in our homes, so that everybody will be happy, so that everyone will have life to the full? If yes, the widow today is another Christ. Her action is prophetic. Her action remains relevant every day.